Hi everyone, welcome to the Movieception Show. I am Fariba, and in this video we're going to do another Desi breakdown for Miss Marvel episode 5. Last time we remember, Kamala ended up in 1947 partition, around the time when everybody was kind of moving around. And in this video, we're going to dive more into kind of what has happened around that time, kind of just talk about a little bit of the Bollywood essence of it, as well as the history of it. So yeah, let's just get started. So yeah, if you remember in my reaction video, I kind of adore this whole logo that Marvel just created here. It definitely gives you a bit of a Bollywood classic essence to it. So if you ever try and ever, watch any of the more older Bollywood movies from like the 40s, 50s, and maybe as soon as the 60s, I would say, no past that. But a lot of those movies are in black and white, but a lot of it feels so classical that you kind of have this, like, you can technically understand there's like this distinct tune to it, like especially with this case. I don't know the name of the song of it itself, but it is definitely a bit more of a classic oldies, old Bollywood type of music and essence to it. And that's why I was like, the moment I started seeing this, I was just like, it's just a way to perfectly set up the whole situation, the whole environment of what's going to happen. Because again, this is what's happening in this episode in particular is that they're going back in time to just give a bit of Kamala's backstory, like not just her backstory, but her family's history in general. And I felt like this was a great way to really start off the episode, just to give you like an essence that this is now, we're going back to the oldies in a way, but also bringing in that classic Bollywood feel to it. So that's why I totally love the sequence right here. So I just want to just talk about the fact how I really appreciate the fact that Marvel kind of gave a bit more of a brief history about what's the partition in a sense, because a lot of us, especially if you don't take like classes like world history or just any sort of history that isn't American history, that you don't really understand or are actually taught what happens during the partition, right? It's not something that you're taught in like a whole sense of like depth. And even though this is not, showing the whole story of what happened during the partition, it is a pretty good way of just explaining what happened, just to give an idea to like the viewers that, well, because we're about to go into partition, possibly because of the fact that, not a lot of people know about this, that it's maybe essential to kind of give a bit more of a background about it. And I feel like that was really, really important, just to kind of share that part of history that not a lot of people know aside of those South Asian subcontinent countries, right? And so I really appreciate the fact that they actually gave a bit more of a history behind this, something that I felt like was really, really essential. And I hope that gave you a better idea of like what this is, like what happened, and how India and Pakistan became independent in the first place. But yeah, and again, this is a pretty good way of kind of being a bit more brief about it. It's not the whole story as I mentioned before, but yeah, no, a great way to kind of set up, again, just setting up the whole situation that's about to happen leading up to this episode. So again, appreciate this. So yeah, just gonna pause here a little bit because again, I know this, in this part, it's actually 1942. This is something that I think was maybe the third episode that was kind of leading up to this. So this is 1942, and it gives you a bit of a history of kind of the oppression that a lot of Indians and Pakistani people kind of had to deal with around those times. It was a very oppressed government by the British Empire at that time, and that's why people like Gandhi and Muhammad Ali Jinnah were fighting for their freedom, because of the fact that, they weren't, free, they weren't getting their voices heard. And of course, it's just like, why is it that they have to be ruled by the British, right? And so this kind of gave you a bit of a glimpse that, well, yeah, they have been oppressed. Their voices have not been heard. They had to fight for their own freedom, just to, have something of their own, right? Like, just like the same way how America was created in the first place, right? I mean, America, when it came to the creation of the United States, like, a lot of people were not happy with the taxation, how the British, Empire were being unfair with them. And, it's just like it got to a point where, they had to fight for their freedom just to be free from the British Empire. And then Independence Day, it's kind of the same thing here. Like, this is kind of the story that even Indians and Pakistani people can resonate with, because they had to deal with a similar situation with the British Empire at that time as well. And so in a sense, like, even though like it is one part being Indian independence, another part being American independence, right? In a sense, there is a bit of a similarities into how both regions had to fight for their own freedom from, an empire, right? And so I hope that that gave also, again, another idea of like what it felt like to be, an oppressed, not just oppressed, but just the whole situation of oppression and just, you know, the abuse of power and all that, and why everything like that has, led to certain people to fight for their freedom, right? And so again, another great way to kind of set up the situation again for this episode, that like, because of everything that happened around the partition, this is what's going to happen with Kamala's story. So again, this is kind of giving you a glimpse of what it's like for Indians, for Pakistani people, for everybody around this time to be, oppressed by the government, and how people like Hassan are speaking out for their freedom, right? And they even mention very, prominent people like Mahatma Gandhi, who basically helped them trying to lead this fight for freedom, right? The same way, again, we're just a lot of comparisons when you compare it to the American history, right? Like you have George Washington, you have Benjamin Franklin, you have all these people who are playing a role in trying to set up the American independence, trying to be free from the British rule, right? And this is the same thing that's happening here. Like, even if they may be Indian, even if this might be a Indian subcontinent, right? The whole struggle for freedom is, in a sense, is very similar. And I hope that that kind of gave a bit more of a perspective as well, that like, again, when it came to independence and trying to, trying to fight for their freedom, that it's not all that different in between regions. So again, a great way to kind of set up just what is going on, and just a bit of great way of just showing that perspective that, again, not a lot of people are familiar with here in the United States if you haven't taken those classes like world history or just, any sort of history course that really dives into more of the outer, just the outer perspective of what's happening in other countries, right? Even in comparative government would be another way of just saying that as well. So again, great way to really set things up. Okay, can we just talk about the fact that we have these two actors right here, and just instantly you can tell there's just great chemistry between them. So let me just dive into a little bit, right? I think the whole romantic aspect that's going on between Aisha and Hassan, like, the moment I saw this, I was like, okay, there has to be this. Just from here, I could just tell that, okay, this is Kamala's great grandfather, Hassan, that they're showing kind of the backstory to. And just for one thing, like, it definitely feels a very, very bit of like that Bollywood-esque, like that classic Bollywood romance story, where you have this one girl, one guy who just meet and then somehow start falling in love with each other. A very common story that you always see in just like a lot of Bollywood films, especially more classic ones. That's like a very, very common theme that you see. But yeah, just right off the bat, like I really got that essence of Bollywood, just watching kind of these two, strangers just, slowly starting to fall in love, right? And I love how they really bring two of the most beautiful actors just playing Kamala's great grandparents. I believe the actress who plays Aisha, her name is Mamith, I think it was Moish Hayat, I believe, or something like that. As for the actor, I'm more familiar with who the actor is. His name is Fawad Khan, as I mentioned in my reaction video. Fawad Khan is also so both actors are Pakistani actors. Fawad Khan is a Pakistani actor who I've actually seen in Bollywood movies before. I believe some of the ones that that some people may be familiar with are like Kapoor and Sons and Khoobsurat. But yeah, no. In terms of this actor, Fawad Khan, I believe he's a very, very popular Pakistani actor who is not just a Pakistani actor, but he can actually sing as well. So he is, again, another way of just showing that a lot of these actors are multi-talented when it comes to just Bollywood and Pakistani, film industry. As for the actress, I believe she's also very well known in Pakistan as well. I think she has like some of the most highest grossing Pakistani films from what I have read. Again, they brought in some two greatly casted actors to be playing Kamala's great grandparents. Again, like, the chemistry between them is just incredible. Again, it just have this Bollywood-esque like feel to it that, oh my god, when you see these two actors, that instantly there is this chemistry that instantly like, wow, that it works, right? And that's why I really, really love just how they kind of set things up. And I think this was like, these were kind of my favorite scenes going into this episode, because again, it was just not the fact that it was just a great way to setting things up, but in a sense, it also kind of brought in a Bollywood feel to it that a lot of us Desis that are familiar with those types of movies can actually feel in this show as well. So it kind of brings a lot of that nostalgia for us. So yeah, again, I love this sort of transition right here, this whole story, this telling. Again, totally love it. Great casting right here. I you can't go any more perfect than this. So great job. Important because not a lot of people are aware of just the tension that started to build up leading up to the partition. There was a lot of religious tension between the Muslims and the Hindus, kind of just a way to really create more of this mess, just to create more chaos in around, you know, the partition, right? So yeah, as kind of what Hassan was basically giving just a bit of a clue right there, that a lot of things were going on between Hindus and Muslims, right? Because now these were the two predominantly these were the two dominant religions in India at that time, right? But now it's like, with the fact that there's going to be a split between Pakistan and India, now it's a matter of, well, which side's going to be which side's going to have the more predominant religion, right? And here you can see kind of how people are starting to discriminate against each other, in the sense like they're discriminating against Hassan because he's a Muslim. And again, like India is a very predominantly Hindu country, right? There's a lot of people who practice Hinduism, and so now it's just a question of, well, do all these Muslims now have to relocate to Pakistan because that's where most Muslims are going to be in? And then it's just like the fact that there used to be a time where these two groups of people were just able to coexist without having this much religious tension. But now leading up into the partition, there's just now this chaos going on. There's now a lot of this religious feud going on. And it's just like they used to be friends, and now everyone's just totally, you know, throwing that out the window because, well, religion is now playing a big role in this. And unfortunately, just to kind of give a bit more of an idea of this, this is not just the only time that this happens, right? This is actually the beginning of what would become basically the whole history behind Hindus and Muslims in India, because there's been a lot of tension between these two groups in India throughout history, right? Even after partition, there's been the Bombay, as I mentioned before, there was the Bombay riots. There's even some tension that has been happening going on recently about this. It is something that has been going on for a long time, and this is just kind of the inception of what's going to happen, right? So yeah, this is something that was very important to kind of give a grasp of, that this is what's going to happen eventually. Again, not a lot of people know the history of this, so again, I really appreciate that they're giving us a bit more of just a perspective of this. Again, it's not the most accurate way of showing it, but it does give you a depiction of what's going on. So that's why, again, this is very important, trying to understand what's going on in terms of the partition and what happens just within India in general, with the whole tension that's going on between Hindus and Muslims. And yeah, so this is true. A lot of people died during this time. As I was saying in a lot of my previous videos, where, at least from what I've seen in a lot of Bollywood movies, again, Bollywood movies are not going to be always accurate as well. I mean, these are just like fictional stories, just like how even when you see any biographical movies, there's going to be aspect of fiction into it. But even with that said, there is a lot of violence that did happen around this time, right? As I mentioned before, like a lot of the train scenes that we were kind of seeing throughout this show, that I was mentioning how, well, there used to be a lot of violence even at these train stations. Like, people were being massacred, people were being killed, whether it be the Hindus, whether it be the Muslims. It was a mix of everything that was going on. Again, it was a lot of chaos, it was a lot of mess, it was a lot of mayhem. And even as Aisha was stating, right, I mean, I know, of course, like in this case, her attentions of why they're moving weren't exactly what she, you know, was trying to present it to be. She was kind of using that as the scapegoat of it, because of the real reason was because of the whole situation with the clandestines, right? But even then, like, it is true, there was a lot of people who were dying in both sides, lots of violence, lots of riots, massacres. It was just horrific around that time, and this is just kind of her giving a bit of a glimpse of what was going on. Again, they don't really show it in this episode because again, it's still supposed to be a family friendly show, right? So they're not going to show the more violent depiction of it, but but the way they're kind of rephrasing it does give you a sense of like, okay, it was not an easy time. It was very violent. It was very chaotic. It was not a great time for just anybody, right? So again, a very important part of that. And again, here's just a depiction of how chaotic it was, how people are trying to move around, right? Like there aren't even enough trains to, transport people in between India and Pakistan, right? So again, a really great way of just showing like a piece of history that has happened that a lot of people don't know aside of, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, around those areas, right? So again, a very, very important thing in terms of just the history behind India, Pakistan, and just the whole region itself. Yeah, so this is a very Desi thing for me. I never pick up my phone. So when I saw this scene, I literally was freaking out. I was like, oh my god, this is something that I've always dealt with all the time because I never ever pick up my phone. So again, I'm pretty sure this is not a Desi thing. This is just a whole general thing that anybody who doesn't pick up their mom's phone is going to be in so much deep trouble. But yeah, no, this was a very, very relatable scene, as I mentioned before. Something that even I was just like, holy crap. I don't know if I'm literally watching my own life in front of my own eyes, but I also love how later on they mention about the Find Me app, and again, something that even my parents are also a bit more familiar with. Again, this was just like a really relatable scene right here that I was just kind of in awe about. So yeah. Aw, yeah, this was just a really cute scene. I was like, oh, and just like, oh, in case of any sense that you are meeting up with anybody, like another Muslim, you always gotta show the respect. That's something that I've always been taught about. You gotta give, the respectful welcomes and all that sort of stuff. So this was kind of, again, a really nice, little added touch of Desi right there. And I love how the Nani is just so... I just love how the Nani's really excited to see this guy because again, she just saw what happened in front of her own eyes, right? Like Kamala just undergone this whole revelation about her history, right? So again, and I love how her mom is just so confused. So again, I love this scene right here. I think it's really important that we talk about this image, right? Because I'll tell you right now, when it comes to trying to find any sort of visual sort of history, right, that in terms of just any family, it's really rare to find anything in terms of going back to like maybe 2-3 generations back, because like at least in those regions there weren't any sort of like, a lot of people weren't that fortunate enough to have this sort of technology, right? Like not a lot of people possessed it, and therefore not a lot of families have this opportunity to pull out any visuals of their great grandparents, because around those times it didn't really exist. Like, I mean, in terms of just like the whole records of it, there aren't really a lot of records around a lot of people around that time. Like, I'll tell you right now, for something like me, I don't have a lot of records regarding about my family because of what's going on around those countries, again because of being under the empire, and just like it's just records were not being as kept in a well-fed way as it is now today. Where today it's like you kind of have to keep up with these records and that they have to be pristine and on top of everything, right? Yeah, I don't even really have any images of my great-grandparents because, again, it's not something that was very common around those times. Again, you had to be really fortunate. You had to have the luxury of it. I do believe I have my dad's grandparents, of images of them. I don't think I have anybody in my mom's side to really have any sort of images about them or that shows them. So the fact that even like her own Nani has this one piece of photo that like, it shows any memory about her family, it's a huge deal. Like, it's not something that you can easily find for anybody who's like me, whose family comes from around those regions, right? Because again, it was not something that was readily available then, like how photos are today. So again, this is a very emotional moment right here, because this is not something that you have the opportunity to possess anytime, anywhere, right? So yeah, this is a very funny thing that I even love seeing, like, because again, you have more photos of like your parents than your grandparents, but But yeah, I've had dealt with this so many times as well. Like, I'll just go through the album and find some random photos of like my mom and my dad, and find them as they were kids and how they were young and how they used to be so, uh, dressy, and how sometimes you can feel a bit more of the 80s sense of it. It's so cute just seeing those photos, and it's like I'm just loving like Kamala's own reaction, because I even have the same reaction all the time whenever I see my parents, younger childhood days photos, right? And so this is again another cute thing that's going on right here. No. This is a very, very cute moment, because this is, again, as I mentioned in my reaction video, like, you're seeing a essence of 3 generations of Aisha's family. Like, not just 3 generations, but 3 generations of females in Aisha's family, right? Just coming together, finally united for once. Because, as I mentioned before, like, there was a bit of this strained relationship between Muniba and Sana for a little while, right? Because of like this whole shame that she had about her family, and how, people would just talk crap about her great grandmother being a possible snake or a witch or something like that, right? Or the fact that she was, wasn't very faithful. When that was never ever the case. This was all just bullshit. And now you just see this very like embracing moment between these 3 generations finally together, and this is just something that even I can relate to, because again, like, for me, it's like I still have my own grandmother as well, my mother's mom, and it's just like it's just really nice to be together for once, just to have 3 generations together, and to just embrace like just kind of ourselves and our family and our history and everything like that. And this is something that I found really, really personal, very, emotional, just because again, this is something that so when you see these types of scenes, like, it's not just something that, just something like somebody like me or any Desi has only dealt with. This is something that so many people have dealt with, just to kind of like have this really emotional moment, just to have generation of people together and just, celebrate their whole history, their whole family history, right? So again, this was a really nice touch right here. Again, like, just giving a bit more of a closure for Kamala to understand who her family is, because I know this is something like a big question leading up to just who she is, and just leading up to her Miss Marvel moniker. But yeah, again, love this scene, although I am, yeah. Yeah, this is definitely a much shorter Desi breakdown video, because I think a lot of it's just because you're kind of already seeing it for yourself on this episode of what's going on in terms of partition. They kind of give you a bit more visuals of it, but not just that, but I've also explained a lot of the history behind it in some of the previous videos, so hopefully that kind of helped understand a lot of what was going on in this episode as well. But yeah, no, I mean, in general, this was a shorter episode in general as well, so there wasn't really a lot to really dive in terms of the Desi scenes, but hopefully that gave you a bit more of an idea of like what was going on, just kind of the perspective of it, just to understand what was going, just to get a bit of that knowledge now that not a lot of people would actually tell you unless you actually met somebody who's Desi, or you've had the fortunate opportunity to actually learn this in any sort of history course. And yeah, and of course now this is the last episode. This is the second to last episode leading up to the finale. The finale will be coming out this Wednesday, and that will be it. This will be the end of the journey of watching Miss Marvel. Then afterwards, I'll have my final breakdown video for the final episode, and hopefully there will be a lot of Desi scenes in that one as well. But yeah, I mean, it's almost the end of this journey, but that shouldn't be, that doesn't mean that I will not be making any more videos, of course. So I'm really super excited to see what we're going to be doing for going forward after this. But yeah, I'll give you more updates about this, but I hope that again this video gave you a bit more of a breakdown of everything, even if it is a shorter video. But yeah, let me know what you think. Did you really enjoy the sequences leading up to the partition? Was it really essential in terms of Kamala's story? What is something that you did like, something you wish you kind of maybe Marvel could have gone more in depth into, or like how does this lead up to Kamala's, character arc in a sense? Let me know in the comments down below, and make sure to like and subscribe. Alright,